And the second game here on Sunday is at 4:45, and it's between St Anne's and Ferns and St Aidans in the ASHDOWN Park and Amber Springs Intermediate Football Championship final. And this promises to be a very close game, Brian, based on the result of their game in the group stages, where I think St Anne's only won by 2 points.
Yeah, 1-8 to 1-6. I think that day, Peter, and I don't expect a scoring fest in that one here on Sunday evening. I think it'll be all the evidence points to a low scoring game. I think if anyone scores 9 or 10 points, they could win the game. Ferns have been very strong defensively, even in their quarter final and semi final. They've only conceded 9 points in the quarter final and 1-5 last weekend against Cushionsdown. They needed Ivan. I think he scored a late free, having missed an easy one just before it. He scored a great free to win it for him last weekend. They got the last 3 points in that game, which is a good sign for them as well. They came from behind to win. The Aidans are a serious outfit, and I think for Ferns, maybe this is the first time they'll probably have met a proper senior football team, and that's no disrespect to any team they've played. It's just the Aidans are going to physically match Ferns, and I think that could be a key for the Aidans. And
Colm, it's a long time since Ferns have been seniors of football side. I think it was back in the 50s they won junior or something. And normally they wouldn't take football maybe as seriously as hurling, but the format seems to have suited them this year in terms of being able to get a bit of a run at the football championship.
Yeah, and it suited a lot of teams really, especially dual clubs. That just to get that bit of a run and training and have all the players available, so you can get your plans across. And it's definitely benefited Ferns this year. And you don't concede that little without being well organised and having a good game plan. And the Aidans will be equally, as good defensively as they've shown throughout the competition so far. They'll probably transition a little bit better into attack than Ferns do. They probably have a few more scorers in their ranks than what Ferns do. But midfield battle is going to be key for this one. Johnny Fogarty is playing some fantastic football this year. Yeah. He scored 2 unreal points now against Timon. Now I'm sure Lloyd had a word with him from shooting where he did, but it worked both times. So, if they can if the Aidans can shut down Ryan Nolan and stop him scoring from play, that's going to be a massive boost, because Ferns haven't really stepped up with any other scorers really. We questioned it last week, and we had other guys chipping in there with a point here and there, but they're for Ferns, I think that they're going to have to develop some kind of a goal threat to get through this one, and maybe a little bit more offensive. Trying instead of slowing, they tend to just over and back to field sometimes, waiting on things to happen. I think if they run at the Aidans, they might have more joy this week. But it's certainly going to be a tactical, intriguing battle, and it'll be not for the faint-hearted, I'd imagine, now on Sunday evening here.
Yeah, as the lad said, would you expect the same in terms of a low scoring, tight sort of a defensive contest, David, or do you think it's something different?
No, it's like we talked about the Adamstown Glenbarntown game. Looking forward to a free scoring affair. It's going to be quite the opposite here, and I mean the lads have alluded to the fact that both play very similar systems. Get men behind the ball, get sweepers behind the ball. Doc will go in for the throw in, he'll immediately go back to the edge of the D, and he won't move much from there. They'll bring their wing forwards back, the Aidans will, but Ferns play a similar type game. So Colm made a great point there insofar as who will transition better. I agree with Colm. The Aidans possibly will get up to the forwards a bit quicker, and they definitely have the better scoring threat, I would say. Another key point in this game, when you have two systems playing against each other like that, is frees. Free taking will be huge on Sunday, and that's why you'd have to give Ferns a shout. Ryan Nolan, very capable free taker, and we saw with Ivan last week, has a huge scoring threat from nearly anywhere in the opposition half. Maybe not as close to goal, but in the opposition half, definitely from 45 yards anywhere out. So free taking will be huge. again, looking back to last week, scoring threat wise, Limo got 2 points, Dio got 2 points, Johnny Fogarty got 2 points. There's a good spread of scorers across the Anne's team. I don't see as much scoring threat on the Ferns team. Again, Brian also mentioned the fact that the physicality, and when you're playing a game like that, when you can get bodies back, and we saw it in the Starlights match against the Shells in the semi-final, when you can get bodies back and defend in a disciplined manner and get bodies around the ball, the bigger you are, the easier it is to tackle. So I mean, in that respect, the likes of Aaron Craig, Doc, Aidan Rash, Johnny Fogue, all getting back there around there, I expect the Anns to be very disciplined in that respect, and I'm sure Lloyd will have drilled that into them.
And is there a risk, David, when a team plays at a very, very talented, experienced senior football side like St Anne's, when they play a defensive game, they tend to leave teams that mightn't be maybe as good as them in the game for that little bit longer? I think PJ Banville and Eamon Furlong were making the point on commentary the other day that the Duffrey were still sort of within a score or two all the time, even though St Anne's looked comfortably the better team. Yeah,
and it's a fair point, and I personally think there's more talent in this Anne's team to possibly not be so married to a defensive type system. However, it's working for them, and I mean, any win is a win, and I'm sure that's what the Anns are looking for. I also made the point in the preview of the Anns game last week was, when played properly, that sweeper system can work really well, and that's where we talk about transition into attack. And I mean, I know they only scored 12 points last week, but still think the Anns transition it well and have the players to move it well. They also have a bit off the bench to come in, like Justin Moran came in and got a few scores last week. Red came in and got a score, not sure how he is for this weekend, but I mean, they have options off the bench as well. Mikey Fogarty came in as well. I mean, there's real competition for places down there as well. But
just to, like, if you were talking about if one team got off to a flyer here on Sunday, if Ferns got off to a flyer of 5 points up, you could always see the Addams coming back into that game with the forwards they have. Whereas if it was the other way around, I think it'd be more difficult for Ferns to claw their way back. They're going to have to keep it really tight here. Now, depending on the weather conditions as well, I mean, we've been blessed the last few weeks with that wind that we always have here. It was, fairly non-existent for most of the games here last weekend. So that will come into effect, especially whenever you have teams that drop back. There's not going to be much room for the forwards to play in here. So neither of these teams, I suppose, especially Ferns, can afford to let the team or let the Anns get up to a 4 or 5 point lead, because it's going to be very difficult to drag it back against an experienced outfit like that.
If you were managing Ferns then, Colm, would you be saying, like, if we win the toss, we may play with the wind and get the lead rather than go behind?
Yeah, well, it depends. The wind doesn't do a whole lot for us. It depends on the certain type of players you have. If you guys, sometimes they play better into the wind because they're better carrying the ball in, as opposed to some teams just doesn't suit them, the wind, because you'll find balls going out over the end line. The forwards have to start in closer to the goal. It really depends on the core players you have. For someone who keeps it tight like Ferns, I think they'd probably want to play into the wind in the first half and get their bearing in the game. Don't get too far behind, and then they'll have that little bit extra in the second half, because the Anns, the Ferns are probably fitter side than the Anns. Now, that's not saying that the Anns aren't fit, but I just think that they're probably a little bit younger in profile. So I'd expect them to finish the game stronger like they did here last week. And so if they can stay within shooting distance, coming up to the last quarter, they'll have every chance in a close game. They just can't afford to let the Anns get ahead.
Just on that, just one point. I mean, from that group game that they played, I think it was in Islegate earlier in the year, I think Ferns got into a 4 point lead, but I think they tried to defend it very early, as opposed to, I'd be saying if Ferns got into a lead on Sunday, I mean, obviously you're married to a system and it served you well all year, but I mean, a final is there to be won, and I mean, if Ferns got into a lead on Saturday, or in fact on the opposite, or Sunday on the opposite side of things, the Anns got into the lead, I'd like to see that bit of ambition to go and make sure and win the game.
Yeah, I just think, Dave, it was a late enough goal that day, I think, that the Anns got to win that game. But the one thing, Ferns are not going to have any fear of the Anns. That's for certain. The Anns are big, strong, and they're big men. They can be intimidating, but Ferns are not going to have any fear of them. Plus, I know 2 years ago, about 6 or 7 of this Ferns team won a Rin 1 under 20 county title, and I know they went to Cushinstown and won a semi-final that they weren't expected to win by a pint. They bet Cushinstown by a pint here last weekend, and in the final of that, they bet the Aidans in Patrick's Park. So, if
the patterns are lining up nicely for them.
The stars are lining up nicely, and
Mystic Bowe.
You know, there's sort of what's the movie? There's something about Ferns, you know.
Well, we've had a good discussion there, lads. So it's time to decide then who do you think is going to win the game. So, Colm, who's going to win it?
I think the men from Ratangan are going back senior.
Ryan.
I think Ferns will win it. I think they'll win it by a pint or two. It'll be a low-scoring game. You know, it could be 8 pints to 7, it could be 9 pints to 7, but I think Ferns will nick it by a pint or two.
David?
Yeah. Another interesting point I meant to make earlier before I make my prediction is that in this game it's interesting that there's 7 senior hurling panellists out of the starting 30 and only 1 senior football panellist, which is I thought was an interesting stat in an intermediate football final. Prediction wise, it's the Anns for me. I think, if the Anns were starting out in a senior football championship, they'd be among my favourites of the 12. I think Ferns have had a fantastic year football wise. I said last week, I didn't expect them to make an intermediate final, never mind a semi-final, so all credit to them and Kevin Morris up there in doing that. But I think the Anns are similar to the time they got relegated into hurling a few years back. I think they'll bounce back immediately.
And David has just made the point I was about to make. when St Anne's went down from senior to intermediate in the hurling, they put the shoulder to the wheel and came straight back up. I think they'll do the same in the football, but again, I do agree with the lads. I think we'll have a sort of a low scoring, tight affair, and maybe St Anne's to come out on top by a point or two.